Viewers, my dear fans, welcome to the Literary Lair. I frigging love Jurassic Park. It was one of my favorite movies as a kid, and it's still one of my favorite movies now. I've always loved dinosaurs, and Jurassic Park only made me love them more. The effects were awesome, and while they aren't scientifically accurate, the film nevertheless inspired a whole generation of paleontologists. I can't say that I loved the sequel films, but I enjoyed them nonetheless, and imagine my elation when I found out that Jurassic Park was based on a book. Another chance for me to experience the magic. So, let's take a trip to Isla Nublar and see if the book lives up to the reputation of the film. The cover is amazing. I have the Barnes & Noble Collected Edition that also has The Lost World in it, but the original cover rocks. It's very minimalistic and serves to show exactly what to expect. Now, why it's a skeleton instead of a fully cloned dinosaur, I don't know, maybe they didn't want to spoil that twist. But I'm not going to nitpick an awesome cover. Let's get to the story. The story of Jurassic Park is pretty straightforward. God creates dinosaurs, God destroys dinosaurs, God creates man, man destroys God, man creates dinosaurs, dinosaurs eat man, woman inherits the earth. Alright, it's a little more complicated than that. But I feel I should tell you that if you think you know the story 65 million years in the making because you've seen the movie, you don't. The movie differs very greatly from the source material, so sit back and allow me to regale you with the original story of Jurassic Park. The novel starts with an introduction to the InGen incident, where it explains about all the scientific advances in the 20th century that allowed InGen to do something that ended so terribly that the company ended up filing bankruptcy. The story truly opens with Dr. Roberta Carter, working in a clinic in Costa Rica and getting a pretty odd patient, a construction worker who all his co-workers claim was run over by a backhoe, although Dr. Carter notices that the wound looks more like an animal mauled him. The man whispers the words Losaraptor to her, but her colleague says that he's talking about the Hupia, which is a faceless vampire demon that abducts children. Because of course it does. The patient dies, and Dr. Carter looks up the word raptor and finds that it means bird of prey. Oh, so that guy was attacked by Klingons. Hey, that makes as much sense as Klingons in a cornfield. The story then flips to the opening scene of The Lost World. No, seriously, they used this part from the first book as the opening scene to the second Jurassic Park movie. A little girl on vacation with her parents land on a random island, and she is attacked by little compsognathuses, and her parents take her to doctors who say that it was just some random lizard that bit her, and that she had an allergic reaction to the bite, since where she was bitten began to swell up. However, the description of the lizard that the doctors give doesn't fit the one that the girl gave to her parents, and they say that she is very observant, as she notices the doctor changing his shirt but not his tie during the night. After talking to her, the doctor begins to doubt his diagnosis and asks the hospital staff to tell him if any similar cases come to the hospital. The doctor learns about all the cases they've gotten of infants sleeping with open windows getting bit by strange lizards that cause swelling and odd reactions, and gets his hands on one of the lizards that was killed by a monkey and sends the sample to be studied by a lizard specialist in New York. And don't worry, it's not Kurt Connors. Turns out that the lizard specialist is on a trip, and so the sample is sent elsewhere to be studied for any diseases it might have been carrying. And a technician remarks upon seeing it and not knowing what it was, that it looks very similar to a dinosaur. But, of course, it can't be, since the sample of the so-called dinosaur is recent and not a million-year-old fossil. And now we finally get to the main character, Dr. Alan Grant, during his fossil dig in the Montana desert, along with Dr. Ellie Sattler, a paleobotanist. An EPA guy, Bob Morris, shows up to ask what they know about John Hammond, since the EPA is curious about his activities, and Grant's dig is funded in some part by Hammond. Morris says that Hammond's organization is doing some weird things, like only supporting cold weather digs and stockpiling a lot of amber, which has no commercial value, and buying an island in Costa Rica. Grant doesn't know anything about it, but Morris shows him a check from InGen made out to Grant for a consultant's fee, and Grant explains that he had just become notable after finding a clutch of dinosaur eggs and was approached by InGen for consulting services. Basically, they wanted to know about the eating habits of dinosaurs, especially young and infant ones. InGen told Grant that the info was for helping them make a children's museum featuring baby dinosaurs, and that they had a whole host of consultants, including other paleontologists, ecologists, and a mathematician named Ian Malcolm, and a systems analyst. Grant sent them the info, they sent him his money, and he hasn't done anything with InGen since then. Grant asks why they came to him instead of confronting Hammond, and Morris tells him that they don't have any evidence that Hammond is doing any illegal activities, but they think he is, so they're snooping around. That was compounded when InGen shipped a bunch of supercomputers to that island in Costa Rica, along with powerful gene sequencers. They assume that InGen is bioengineering something they don't want to be regulated by the government, and that it could be dangerous, citing an incident where a company tested a bioengineered rabies vaccine on a village in Chile without their consent, and could have done major damage, and that's why the EPA is so worried. Morris leaves, and Ellie and Grant start laughing about the concept of John Hammond being a master supervillain, and Ellie tells Grant that he got a call from that lab from the previous chapter, and they want him to identify some remains. After identifying it as dinosaur remains, they get a call from Hammond inviting Grant and Ellie to check out Hammond's nature preserve in Costa Rica over the weekend as consultants, and as such they'd be getting paid a lot of money, and so they accept, since that money would help finance their continued archaeological digs. Hammond also calls up Donald Gennaro, the lawyer for the park, and invites him to the island as well. He agrees to go since his firm wants to investigate the goings-on at the park, and going with the consultants makes his job easier. The next day, Grant and Ellie get an InGen envelope with all the information and promo material about the project before they go there. They look it over and they go back to their dig, and we see Grant's hatred of computers in action, along with some exposition on the equipment used in the digs, and they prepare to catch their flight. Gennaro also prepares to go the weekend of his daughter's birthday and meets up with Hammond on the plane, where we get some exposition on Hammond's life that we didn't really get in the movie. Turns out that Hammond would get funding from a tiny elephant the size of a cat that he claimed was made from genetic engineering, which was a bit of a fib, since it was really the result of putting a dwarf elephant embryo in an artificial womb and messing with the hormones. Another issue was that the lab that made it couldn't replicate the elephant as hard as they tried, plus the elephant was prone to colds and acted more like a rodent than an elephant, but it worked and Hammond got his money to fund his true dream project, InGen. Gennaro asks how the park is doing and how many animals there are, as the original idea was 12, but they have 238 now. Gennaro also asks about the issues they had, like the deaths of workmen, but Hammond ensures that everything in the park is perfectly fine. They pick up Grant and Ellie and head on their way. Biosyn, the company that did that stuff in Chile with the rabies vaccine, call an emergency meeting as their lead geneticist, Louis Dodgson, tells them about InGen's park that has replicated extinct animals from the past. Dinosaurs, to be exact, and how he's going to get samples for it from a disgruntled employee willing to steal some embryos and pass them along. Dodgson meets with the employee, Dennis Negri, and gives him a large shaving cream container to put the embryos in, which, when I first read it, concerned me, since how the hell was he going to get on an airplane with that? And then I remembered that this was the late 80s, early 90s, and airport security wasn't as beefed up as it is now. Then they go and pick up Ian Malcolm before they head straight for Isla Nublar. Malcolm gets straight to it and immediately starts hitting on Ellie. When Ellie comments that Dallas is pretty warm for wearing all black in, Malcolm retorts by saying that black is really good for heat, and then says that he, like Lego Batman, only works in black, and sometimes very, very dark gray. He also goes on to explain chaos theory, which in English means that things created to run on a specific system of order are destined to fail because everything has unpredictable variables in them that cannot be accounted for in advance. Basically, Jurassic Park is an accident waiting to happen. They land, and then the visitors all get to see the main attraction of Isla Nublar, a dinosaur. Well, a brontosaurus to be exact. They all watch it in awe, and Hammond and Regis, the PR manager for InGen, get to starting the tour, welcoming them to Jurassic Park. They get into the exposition of how the dinosaurs were made, which was replaced by that animated sequence in the movie, which, frankly, I think was the best way to do that. By this point, I think we all know the story about the dinosaurs. They used DNA from mosquitoes and other blood-sucking insects stuck in amber to replicate the dinosaurs and filled the gaps with reptilian, amphibian, and avian DNA, which explains why the dinosaurs don't have feathers, and so the novel actually inadvertently covered its own plot hole. So that's pretty cool. Oh, and along with the consultants, Hammond also invited his grandchildren, Timmy and Lex, whose parents are going through a divorce, to join them on the island. We also have another huge divergence from the movie, because Lex has no purpose in the book. Timmy gets the computer skills and the dinosaur knowledge, and Lex gets to be the screaming girl. So that's one thing that the movie has going for it. We learn a bit about Timmy and his home life, where his father doesn't share or encourage his love of dinosaurs. Timmy tells Grant about when they went to the Museum of Natural History, and Timmy notices that their T-Rex skeleton is wrong, and his dad tells him that it's impressive, but also takes them home before they can see any of the other dinosaurs because his dad wants to watch the game on TV. Grant manages to bond a little with Timmy as he knows the skeleton that he was talking about, but doesn't think it'll ever get fixed if Hammond's project gets big, since living dinosaurs trump skeletons any day. Then they go through the tour and show them the computer systems that help them arrange the DNA, and then they get to the most important part. The part where they see the baby velociraptor, and Dr. Wu explains that the dinosaurs can't breed. They've been irradiated, and if that fails, all the dinosaurs are female. They also explain their failsafe for if an animal escapes. They have a lysine deficiency, meaning that if they don't get their dose from the humans at the park, they die. Grant wants to see the velociraptors, so they go and check those out. When they do, the raptor jumps at them when they pass the holding pen, and it gets itself electrocuted on the fence. For so-called intelligent animals, that's pretty stupid. While the tour keeps going, Dr. Wu tells Hammond that he wants to change the dinosaurs again and make them slower and more domesticated because people won't like fast dinosaurs. Which I find extremely stupid because you have actual dinosaurs. People do not care if they're fast or slow. It's actual frigging dinosaurs. That's amazing in its own right. Who cares if they move too fast and look like sped up Phil? I mean, if you wanted to make them safer, that's one thing, but Wu specifically cites the fact that they need better dinosaurs for entertainment value. Dinosaurs are entertainment enough! Although, based on what happened in Jurassic World, maybe dinosaurs aren't entertainment enough for the people of the Jurassic Park world. Ingrates. The tour group checks out the control center for scanning all the dinosaurs and making sure they're in check, and Malcolm gets rebuked at every turn by John Arnold, the park's chief engineer. Then they get into the cars, and Tim, Lex, and Regis are sent in one car, and they start up the narration read by Richard Kiley, and in the novel, Regis gives the famous "spared no expense" line. They move through the park, and we get exposition on John Arnold, learning that he helped build Disney World. The tour checks out all the other dinosaurs, finally seeing the T-Rex, and we learn a bit about Muldoon. He was a game warden in Africa before joining the Jurassic Park theme, and thinks that some of the dinosaurs they have are just too dangerous to keep in the park setting, since they know so little about them. And honestly, Muldoon is one of the more sane people in the novel. He understands that they're wild animals and that they're inherently dangerous. Muldoon was a proponent of having the park heavily armed with tow missiles in the event any of the bigger dinosaurs escape. The park refused to do that and settled on missile launchers kept in a locked room that only Muldoon has the keys to. The tour group watches in awe as the T-Rex eats a goat and walks away with it hanging from its mouth. The tour group thought it was amazing, but also wonders what would happen if it were to escape. All of them agreeing, of course, that there'd be no stopping it. Hammond, of course, is angry that they're so negative, and Wu thinks the park is completely safe. Personally, I think Jurassic Park is as safe as the Titanic was unsinkable. It starts to rain, and the supply boat for the park decides to get out while the storm gets worse, since the island doesn't have a good harbor, and so if they stay, the boat will get destroyed. The tour group checks out the Stegosaurus, and Ellie goes to figure out why it's sick. She at first assumes that it's a toxic plant in the area, but since the plant tastes bitter, they can't figure out why the Stegosauruses would eat it. It turns out that the Stegosaurus was actually ingesting gizzard stones that helped crush the plant matter so they could digest it, and would accidentally eat the berries when they were swallowing the stones. Then they find something disturbing. Eggshell fragments. The chief vet, Jerry Harding, says that the dinosaurs can't breed, but Grant is adamant that it's a dinosaur egg. Velociraptor to be exact. They call Hammond and have Arnold check out how many dinosaurs there are, and they find out that there are more than what they started with, proving that the dinosaurs are in some way breeding. Why they're breeding, they don't know, but Grant mentions that certain species of frog can change gender for breeding purposes, and since frog DNA was featured in the genetic engineering of the park, it's possible that that's the reason. The storm starts getting worse, and Grant and Malcolm decide to head back to the lodge with the kids, while Ellie elects to stay behind with the Stego. Gennaro stays with Ellie, and Regis heads back with Grant. Grant and Malcolm take one car so they can have a private conversation, and Timmy, Lex, and Regis get into the other car. Malcolm explains to Grant about fractals, but their conversation is interrupted when they notice Lex in the other car pointing to the boat that left. She thinks she saw an animal on it. They look, and lo and behold, there are raptors on the boat. But that doesn't make any sense because Samuel L. Jackson is on the island. This Snakes on a Plane prequel is terrible. Nedry takes everything offline to run a diagnostic, and so they can't contact the tour group, and Nedry gets up to get a drink. Power cuts out, and the land cruisers are stuck near the T-Rex paddock. Nedry sneaks into the room where they keep the embryos and steals the ones that Dodgson wants. Arnold and Muldoon check out the damage that Nedry did, learning that power is off in key areas, including the electric fences. Grant and Malcolm sit in the Jeep trying to figure out what happened, and the T-Rex shows up, causing Regis to rush out of the Jeep and leaves the kids alone instead of Gennaro, who did it in the movie. Grant tells them to be quiet and still, and the T-Rex thrashes the kids' Jeep. Malcolm and Grant rush to save the kids, but they both get tossed around by the T-Rex. Ellie, Harding, and Gennaro try to contact Hammond, but the radios are still down. Arnold tries to figure out what Nedry did, but concedes that he needs Nedry to figure it out, and says that they need to find him. Nedry gets back to his car, but ends up face-to-face with the Dilophosaurus, who seemingly kills him. However, I know that he escaped off the island and ended up living in Rutherford, Ohio, becoming a police officer who got romantically involved with a woman who showed up out of nowhere and disappeared 6 years later. And if you thought I was going to go for the low-hanging Seinfeld joke, you don't know me very well. Dr. Wu and Hammond sit around eating ice cream, and Hammond talks about his own mortality, and about how Hammond is so happy that the park will make a lot of money because he can charge whatever he wants for admission and no one can fault him for it. And that seems to be an oddly stark contrast to the nice grandfatherly Hammond from the movie. I mean, the Hammond in the movie wasn't perfect, but he didn't seem as greedy as the novel's Hammond is. I mean, during the lunch scene in the film, that Hammond explicitly states that the park isn't only for the super rich, when Gennaro basically quotes what Hammond in the novel said.
And we can charge anything we want, $2,000 a day, $10,000 a day, and people will pay it. And then there's the merchandise. And I can personally...
Donald, this park was not built to cater only for the super rich. Everyone in the world has the right to enjoy these animals.
Meanwhile, novel Hammond is just kind of a jerk. Harding and Ellie start heading back when they notice the compy's out, and they usually don't go out at night unless there's a dead animal, so they go to investigate. Meanwhile, Tim wakes up in the wreckage of the car and tries to get his bearings and goes out to find Lex. Dr. Wu then goes to check the DNA setups and sees that all the breeding dinosaurs have frog DNA in them like Grant has guessed. Timmy finds Lex, who has gone into a state of shock, and they meet up with Grant. Meanwhile, Ed Regis awakens and heads back toward the camp. Grant checks over the kids for injuries, and they watch from a cliff as Regis is eaten by a juvenile T-Rex. Grant and the kids run away as Hammond commands Arnold to get the park working so his grandkids are safe. Ellie and Harding go back to the visitor center, and Muldoon and Gennaro go out looking for other cars, and they find Regis's body, or rather, bits of it. They also find where the kids were, and they notice that Timmy's watch was on the ground. The crystal is cracked, but the band is intact, meaning that he took off the watch after the attack and so is potentially alive. Then, after a bit more of searching, they find Malcolm, who is not in the best shape, but still alive for the time being. They load him up and head to get medical attention, and Gennaro and Muldoon try to figure out who will tell Hammond that his grandkids are missing in the park full of dangerous dinosaurs. Arnold and Dr. Wu figure out what happened to the computers, and they see that Nedry put in a trapdoor to aid him in taking out the systems for some reason. Wu goes to check out the embryos, and Arnold tries to get the systems back online. Grant and the kids keep walking around, and Timmy shares his home life story with Grant, talking about his parents' divorce and all that fun stuff. And Timmy asks Grant if he was divorced, and Grant tells him that his wife died. Timmy asks if Grant and Sattler are an item, and Grant says that they aren't and that she's his student. They hop a fence and find a place to rest, and they fall asleep. Arnold gets the power back up and sets the computers to check for any movement, human or dinosaur, so they'll know when they find Grant and the kids. Malcolm is being treated and is doped up on morphine, and is basically just talking at nothing and ranting delusionally. Muldoon heads out to check on the fences and figure out the issues, and the rest of the staff left on the island sets out to figure out where all the attractions went and get them back to their proper spots. Grant wakes up and finds Lex playing with a baby Triceratops that she's named Ralph, and they reunite it with its mother before heading out to set off the motion sensors. Gennaro argues with Arnold about shutting down the systems momentarily to regain access to the phone so they can get Malcolm off the island into a proper hospital, and when the systems come back, they find their missing T-Rex, attacking a group of hadrosaurs, and Muldoon goes out to check it out. Grant and the kids escape the T-Rex on a river, and Muldoon and Gennaro find Negru's body. Grant and the kids come upon the aviary and go inside to see if they can find a way to contact the control room. Arnold can't find them, and Malcolm says that it's because the motion sensors don't cover an integral part of the park where someone or something could evade detection by going down a maintenance road. Malcolm suggests that they may have been on the river, but Arnold says that it's a bad idea, since it leads into the aviary and they've had some problems with that. The dactyls are territorial. The dactyls go after Grant and the kids, of course, and they rush to escape the aviary. They take Lex's baseball glove, and her and Tim agree that they hope that the dactyls choke and die on it. As they relax after escaping, Tim asks Grant why he'd asked about the frog DNA the night before, and Grant tells him about the sex change with the frogs, right before they run into something that sounds like a bunch of owls. No, run, guys! He's going to explain something to you about Ocarina of Time! Malcolm also tells Ellie to start prepping for the Malcolm effect, which is the chaos theory on the park's failure. We go back to Grant, and it turns out that the raft wasn't passing owls after all, but a herd of Dilophosauruses. They float past them and hope for the best, while Muldoon and Gennaro find the T-Rex and Muldoon shoots it. But the laser sights on the gun was dead, and so he seemingly missed, and they have to head back to the base to get a fresh battery. Grant and the kids go down on a waterfall, and the T-Rex attacks again, getting Lex's life vest before they escape. Grant goes off alone for a minute to find a phone, and Lex and Timmy stay outside. Grant finds a young velociraptor, one bred in the wild, and the kids try to escape the T-Rex again, right before it's taken down by Muldoon's tranquilizer that hit him after all. It just took time to work. All the power goes out again because the park is running on auxiliary power, meaning the fences never came back online. Arnold and Wu head to turn the power back on, and Muldoon and Gennaro go out to take out any of the escaped dinosaurs. The raptors attack Muldoon, and Gennaro books it out of there, and Malcolm continues to rant about why the park was a bad idea. Muldoon radios Wu and asks if the power is back on, and we find out that he's stuck in a pipe. Arnold is killed by a velociraptor before he can restore power, and Wu tries to figure out what to do. Gennaro gets attacked, and Malcolm decides that the odds of any of them getting off the island alive are pretty low. Grant and the kids make it to the visitor center and finally get a hold of Ellie, just in time for her to tell them that the raptors can open doors and might be in the same building as they are. Wu and the others figure out that they can provide a distraction to give someone enough time to rush to the maintenance shed, and Ellie volunteers to be the distraction and heads out while Grant leaves the kids alone for a few minutes to go to the shed, and the kids head into the kitchen to look for food. While distracting them, Wu ends up getting ambushed by the raptors and killed. Grant gets to the shed and starts to reset the power, and the kids hide from the raptor in the kitchen. Grant runs into Gennaro, and they head to reset the computer. Timmy and Lex head to the control room and find a radio, and Timmy starts to check out the computers. Timmy messes around with the computer and starts to reset everything, bringing the video feeds back, and they rush to get power back up as Muldoon tells them what to do from the radio. Timmy and Lex leave the room for a moment, and they check if there are raptors near and get themselves locked out of the room, and so they grab a key card off a dead guard and hop into the closest room, the nursery. But good thing for them they did, because Grant and Gennaro also ended up in that room as well. They escape and get back into the control room and start resetting power. They call up the supply boat to have it turn around, and Gennaro grabs the phone so that he can order them to turn around and bluffs his way out of it by making up a fake law and forces the boat to turn around. They head out to manually take the raptors up, and Hammond goes for a walk, contemplating making a new park that would fix all the errors that happened at his previous park, and falls down, breaking his ankle, eventually getting eaten by the compies. Malcolm's fever hits a pitch and he goes into rapid delirium. The Costa Rican Air Force arrive, and they get them all off the island, save for Hammond and Malcolm. It's heavily implied that Malcolm died as a result of his injuries, which is retconned in the sequel. The novel ends with Grant getting debriefed in San Jose and gets grilled by the Costa Rican government, as they are pretty understandably pissed about Hammond's deception. The guy who found the first copy back at the beginning and shows up and tells Grant that none of them, save for the kids, are going to be leaving anytime soon. And that was Jurassic Park. Was it good? No. It was awesome. This book is everything about the movie that I love, and then some. But it raises a valid point against the movie. The movie is a terrible adaptation. I know I put it on my top 10 best adaptations list, but that was before I had read the book. I had just assumed, based on what others had told me, that it was a faithful adaptation. But that doesn't mean it's a bad movie. Far from it. Jurassic Park is a classic. It's one of my favorite movies, but it's not a good adaptation of the source material. So much has changed that the entire story takes on a whole new life. And that's not a bad thing. Look at it like MASH. The TV show and the book are radically different, but they both tell good stories. I know as a book reviewer I should be pissed that they changed it, but I can't be. They both tell good stories. Both versions are equally amazing. It's a great book and a great movie. I highly recommend both to anyone who wants a good dinosaur story. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of the Literary Lair, you can hit that subscribe button. And if you have any comments or complaints about the video, you can put those in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed this video, show it to your friends and share it around the internet. And maybe consider supporting the show on Patreon. See you next time. Oh, and I have seen Jurassic World, and I thought it was okay.